Christian, a few days after Marc Guéhi's transfer, we actually did a show on it.
Yes, it was the biggest transfer of the window to date. We think it had broader implications for the Premier League today. We hope to bring you bonus episodes whenever we can. This is our first one. We hope you like it.
Christian, good to see you. A few interesting games last night. You looked at Manchester City's defence, and they certainly needed strengthening out in the Arctic circle. And we see Marc Guéhi, as we peer through the transfer window, has suddenly arrived for £20 million at Manchester City. Very well timed after last night. But then if I can take you back to the last transfer window, and you see Marc Guéhi scoring at Villa Park for Crystal Palace.
A worldie,
and you see the Crystal Palace players ushering him over to the fans and effectively saying goodbye because everyone was expecting him to sign for Liverpool.
Yeah.
And then the next day, everything's going well. He's having his MRI. And then about 7 o'clock in the evening, the deal gets pulled because Oliver Glasner tells Steve Parrish, his chairman, I cannot lose Marc Guéhi. So that gets pulled. Liverpool don't get their man. And everyone's kind of expecting Liverpool to go again in this transfer window. And yet he turns up at Manchester City. Take me into you've been in many boardrooms, take me into City's boardroom. What is their approach?
I think what's interesting about this deal is what it tells us about the positions of City and Liverpool at this moment in time. Let's start with City. I think three things really jumped off the page for me with this Guéhi signing. The first was, in many respects, it showed City kind of scorning conventional wisdom. The wisdom's out there that a player with a year left on his contract isn't worth very much in the transfer market. A player with 6 months left's worth virtually nothing. And so a sort of natural resistance to pay a transfer fee for a player in that situation. I think when Manchester City's board looked at that, they were creative, they were bold, they were willing to think out of the box. And I suspect they looked at it and said to themselves, look, let's step back. What's the real market value of Marc Guéhi? Answer, 60, 70 million pounds all day compared to comparable 25-year-old international centre-backs. So he's running down his contract. We really need him. We're in contention for 4 trophies. By the way, the financial benefit of winning the Premier League, massive bonuses for Manchester City in their sponsor contract, winning the Champions League or going very deep in the Champions League last year.
Sorry, just on those two, what are they worth? I know we've been swapping messages, in the Champions League week. What will it be worth to win it? It's like 150?
Last year, Arsenal made £100 million from going very deep into the Champions League.
And for the Premier League?
Well, it's much more the indirect effect of the Premier League. So I suspect that Manchester City's key commercial contracts will have very big bonuses associated with winning titles.
But also from the Premier League itself.
Maybe £5 million here each way. Each position in the Premier League is worth £3 million.
But Liverpool was worth about 150 million last season. So the point is, to just sort of back up your point, is that City will, if they land these trophies or go far in the trophies, particularly the Champions League, any cost on Marc Guéhi is completely justified now.
Well, they would certainly look at that as the return piece of the equation. And then the risk piece, as I'm saying, is kind of the capital value. So if he's worth £70 million in a normal market, in this transaction to sign Marc Guéhi today, there's kind of 3 pockets of value. The player himself, he's going to get a salary from Manchester City or for whoever's signing him from the Big Six in the Premier League or leading European clubs. That is what it is. Whether they pay that salary in the summer or now, Marc Guéhi, he's going to be a £250,000 to £300,000 a week footballer. So it's a wash between January and the summer, which leaves the transfer fee and the signing bonus. Now, the conventional wisdom is if a player runs down the contract to 0, his agent can negotiate on his behalf a very large signing fee on top of salary, with the simple argument that this is in lieu of the transfer fee you didn't have to pay because I took the risk of running my contract down. Let's call it the signing fee. I think City looked at this and said, this is a £70 million footballer all day. There's money to go to Palace. There's money to go to the player. If we have to pay 10, 20 million pounds of signing fee. If we have to pay 20 million pounds a transfer fee, and we know that figure, we don't know the signing fee, but if it was 20 million pounds, that's 40 million pounds. This is a 70 million pound footballer. We're still 30 million pounds to the good, and we have the player in the building in January, not the summer, which means two things. Yes, as you say, Henry, this player could be the difference between 4 Premier League positions. That's 12 million quid. A bonus for winning the Premier League, that's another 5 or 10 million pounds. Going really deep in the Champions League, that could be another 20 million. This guy could pay for himself in the summer. And by the way, if we have spent 40 million pounds now, and if in the summer Real Madrid come in and say we want Marc Guéhi all guns blazing, he's worth 70 million pounds all day.
Especially after a World Cup, if he has a good World Cup with England.
I think that's just bold and creative financial thinking. Now, the second point I'd make about them doing it in January, which definitely surprised a lot of people, is if Marc Guéhi wanted to maximise value here, I still stand by my view that he would have waited till the summer. So if he had run an auction in the summer amongst Manchester City, Liverpool, Arsenal in the Premier League at least, Bayern Munich and Real in Europe, 5 clubs, no transfer fee, so in effect that transfer fee budget available for a signing fee, I think we can all see it's very likely that that signing fee would have been higher, and the salary would probably have bumped up higher as well. I think we have to say, and I'd be very interested in your views on Marc as a person, but he's already showed in the way he handled himself in the transfer window in September, the way he carried on playing, the way he didn't sulk and whine when that deal fell through. I think he's a pretty unusual character, and it clearly wasn't all about the money for Marc. But from Manchester City's perspective, Henry, and I must make this point, their financial firepower was a really relevant factor. This is a team that has the largest revenues in the Premier League. The only club to 3 times, I think, have revenues over £700 million a year.
More than Manchester United.
More than Manchester United, more than Liverpool. Liverpool's results this year may tip that even higher. But up until today, 2025, City are the only club to 3 times have revenues over 700 million. They've made over 500 million selling players in the last 5 years. They've been a brilliant seller of footballers as well as a very big investor. So they're the biggest kid on the block in terms of their revenues. And as you know, revenues are what dictate your spending power in the current way that football is regulated. You are allowed to spend, roughly speaking, a proportion of your revenue. So if you've got the biggest revenues, you can spend the most. But then that leads to the third point that struck me. And I haven't seen a lot of focus on this, about their ability to do this deal in the last couple of days. Since that September 1st deadline day moment where this player was a Liverpool player and then he wasn't, 8 days after that, on the 8th of September last year, a politics moment kicked in football. And you know, money, power, politics in football now.
You love them all.
In my opinion, it's as big as on-field issues. Let me explain. On the 8th of September last year, the Premier League, who had been in a 2-year legal battle with Manchester City, not the famous 115 charge case that I'm sure we'll come to at a later date, which is basically a look into the past of Manchester City, but a totally separate legal case where in fact City sued the Premier League, and they sued them because they wanted to argue that the Premier League's rules on associated parties were illegal. Simple terms, associated parties, where a football club is owned by a party who also owns, for example, a sponsor, then those rules exist to make sure that those sponsor deals are done at a normal market rate that you'd get from a sponsor who had nothing to do with the football club. That's a simplified way of thinking about it. Those rules, let me tell you, have been in football in the Premier League a very long time, but they were strengthened after the Saudi takeover of Newcastle. I was in the room when that happened, and it turned out the rules had never been tested before, and so the rules were strengthened. Man City said, don't agree with those rule changes. We're going to be one of the 2 principal targets of those rules, and they went to court. 3 different lawsuits. Finally, last September, that case was settled out of court. Simple terms, the Premier League, City met and said, we're both spending a bunch of legal fees. It's not good for either of us. Let's do a deal. and this is the deal that was done. City accepted that the Premier League could keep their rules regulating how associated party sponsor deals are approved. But in return for City agreeing that, the Premier League agreed that City's sponsorship with Etihad on its shirt and on the stadium, a new deal. So they've been the sponsor for a very long time. City have been trying to do a new deal with Etihad at a much higher value for a much longer period. That deal could be approved. But the crucial point, as far as I'm concerned, coming right back, zooming right back into Marc Guéhi, is sitting there in January, after that September moment when it looked like this boy was going to be a Liverpool player, City have had, in my opinion, a very big win off the field with an out-of-court settlement that means they can now look at their sponsorship income coming forward, which means their ability to say, you know what, we'll give Crystal Palace a 20 million transfer fee. We'll pay Marc Guéhi a massive signing fee. Their financial firepower in a world where it's all about revenue was enhanced 8 days after that window shut in September.
Are the real losers from the 8th of September verdict Newcastle United?
Well, I think Liverpool and Newcastle United. So, as I say, I think we should look at how Liverpool, I'd be very interested in your view on this. Let's go back to last summer and let's just think about that window. I remember at the time you were struck by this. I publicly praised what was a change of strategy by Liverpool, a very, very bold approach to the transfer market. Over most of the time since I sold them the club in 2010, they had run a largely balanced transfer budget. Brilliant sales being used to replace with better and more important footballers.
Brilliant sales like a Coutinho,
142 million euros. Those monies, I would argue, maybe the two biggest signings of the Klopp era, Van Dijk and Alisson. Pound for pound, 140 for Coutinho, I think 70 and 60 for those two players. So running a very balanced book until last summer, where on the back of Slot's title win...
and they hadn't spent in that season, apart from
true.
Chiesa for 10 million.
That's true.
So it was almost like the war chest that we love talking about in the media had been increased.
Yes, and maybe they'd had a look at Slot and let him have a look at the squad for a year. I'm absolutely certain he outperformed in winning that title. But then, a really concerted investment program over that summer. And this is what I now think, and I apologise for hindsight on this, because nobody was more impressed with their boldness than me that summer in basically saying our competitors are in disarray, United, Chelsea, major issues. So we've got a chance here to create a dynasty. That's what it felt like last summer. And they spent £320 million on forward players. Wirtz 110, Ekitike 70, and in the end, Isaac 125 million. Plus other players too. So
they did need to bring strikers in because obviously the tragedy over Diogo Jota, Luis Diaz being sold, and Núñez as well.
Yeah, but if you add those up, and obviously a terrible situation with Jota, but the sale of Diaz and the sale of Núñez raised about £110 million. So just up top, 320 out, 110 in, so about 210 million on an enhanced forward line. And here's my point, looking back now with hindsight to that moment. So a couple of things. Firstly, 220 million net on forwards. It's a very big number relative to Marc Guéhi, who was now moved for £20 million in January and who Liverpool very, 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 very nearly owned for £35 million on the 1st of September. Now, on the 1st of August last summer, two things happened. Liverpool made a bid for Alexander Isak at £110 million. They also briefed publicly that they were interested in signing the Crystal Palace defender, Marc Guéhi. Now, Henry, tell me, I believe at that time, Palace, on the record, to manage their fans and everyone's expectations, said that they would have to take money for Guéhi rather than risk getting zero. Is that right?
Steve Parrish said that on the record, and he said it was, unless he signed a new contract, we cannot have an asset like that diminish. Yeah.
Okay. So now it's the 1st of August. So it's a wide open door with Palace to sign Guéhi. And the price talk, the market speculation, the leaked figures by Palace, whatever you call it, we call that the price talk in the deal business. The price talk was 30 to 40 million pounds.
35, I think, was the headline. Yeah.
So nobody was saying it was 50, 60, 70, okay? So my point is simple. They say they want Guéhi on the 1st of August. They do nothing. Between the 1st of August and the 1st of September, the whole Isak saga played out. Now, you've pointed out they needed 3 forwards because they'd lost 3 forwards. But it was very unclear whether they would get Isak until it became clear they would, which was late August, when Newcastle said, oh, all right then, he will not agree to stay for another year. We've got to cash in our chips. Liverpool had held a bit back and gave Newcastle another £15 million. So instead of the 110 they bid on the 1st of August, 125 on the 1st of September. So a 15 million movement on the third forward in the building, totalling over 220 million of spending. And yet in the month of August, it didn't cross their mind to maybe bid Palace 35, maybe 36, maybe 37, maybe 40. Maybe 5 million more.
At a time where they let Jarell Quansah, who'd had a very good European under-21 championship, look, he might not be absolutely elite level, but they let him go as a very good, young, promising centre-half. But there's a lot of hindsight here. So Isak, people could understand why they were going for him because he was an outstanding player and just the type of clinical finisher that Liverpool needed, everyone thought they needed. 1 or 2 people raised concerns about his injury record, but on the whole, I think people could understand why they were going for and why Newcastle fans and owners and manager were frustrated at the prospect of losing him and the manner in which they were losing him, someone downing their tools in such an unprofessional, ungrateful manner. I don't think people realised that Ekitike was going to be so effective. In hindsight, you would say, well, actually, we could have just got Ekitike and then strengthened.
And I'm not suggesting regret on doing those 3 deals. I'm making a strictly financial. I'm imagining it was me actually managing the transfer window.
You would have done it earlier.
I just think there's a sense, and I'm sorry because I admire much of what they do, and I really like, by the way, Richard Hughes, who I've done business with. It looks to me like they were a bit cute.
Yeah.
You know, they thought, we've got Marc. They've done their deal with Marc. Marc knows salary, signing bonus, what position he's playing, what his shirt number is. They're confident. That's standard opera. They've got the player. And Steve's gone on the record saying, we can't keep him. So I think they think that they don't want to get drawn into having to pay Palace anymore by a negotiation. If we just wait till deadline day, and give them a Tioli, take it or leave it. And that's what they did.
They'd also bought another centre-half, Leone, who got injured. So it then transpired as the month wore on that they would need to move for Guéhi. But I just want to land this point that for the sake of £2-4 million, they put themselves in a position. You get to the 1st of September, they look really smart. They've basically got fantastic new forward line. However you look at it, they've managed to land Isak, and they've got Guéhi in the building, having his photo, having had his scan. And then lo and behold, an injury kicks in. Palace do not have a centre-back and have to pull the deal. And I simply believe that at any point in the 3 weeks before that, for the sake of 1, 2 or 3 million, Guéhi would have been in the building earlier. And with the benefit of hindsight, this is what then happens. Think about our themes. As I say, 8 days after that window shut on the 8th of September, an off-field matter, an out-of-court settlement of a court case that seems rather remote to Manchester City and Liverpool. But my point for our listeners is the politics of football, the rules, the negotiations, the skill with which City engineered that out-of-court settlement actually 4 months later in January has a direct impact, A, on Liverpool, because suddenly City are
even more emboldened to bring their financial strength to the equation, to do a deal for Guéhi in January, which Liverpool refused to countenance and compete on. And you may wonder, if you'd been Liverpool, should they have gone head-to-head with City last week for Guéhi?
Would it? You know how I love to bring in the human and the emotional into your boardroom world of pounds, shillings, and pence.
Henry. You're
and
very sensitive
cold-hearted businessmen moving these wonderful footballers around. If Marc Guéhi, so we're looking at Alexander Isak and the way he behaved in that month.
Yeah.
And you contrast that with Marc Guéhi, who is a very religious individual. His father's a pastor. He's incredibly professional. The fact that he carried on captaining and leading and playing
you mentioned
so
the Villa
well.
game.
The Villa game.
That night he
scored
played before heading to Liverpool. And of course, my old club, on the same match, Emi Martinez thought he was going to Manchester United the next day and didn't play.
Guéhi would have been at Liverpool if he'd stamped his feet and Palace thought, right, let's move him on.
On deadline day?
Probably before, because I think if he'd said,
yes,
right, I'm not going to play, and then they would have seen a rapidly depreciating asset and thought, well, if we can get sort of 30 million from Liverpool now,
I think you're completely right. Or even at the most basic level, we can say, and I've already said to you, let me be clear, as a strictly financial matter, okay, Marc would have made more money waiting to the summer. Let's be real. I'm absolutely certain.
In terms of wages or the price, the signing on?
Signing plus wages, either or. There's no question about that. So this is a footballer for whom it isn't all about the money. We can conclude that from the mere facts that he did this. Essentially, Palace getting a £20 million transfer fee ate into the available funding for that footballer to take a signing bonus and his agent. And so that's really clear. But the fact he didn't spit the dummy, imagine 6 o'clock on deadline day, he was a Liverpool player. 7 o'clock, he was not. He didn't sulk and whinge and whine. He got his head down and thought, you know what, it wasn't meant to be. I'll move in January or the summer. Didn't miss a beat at Palace. I agree with you on that. But I still come back to Liverpool. What looked like a bold, brave summer of proper net investment and spending, Henry. I think they were penny wise, pound foolish on Marc Guéhi in the summer. And I find that rather strange. And I think I can absolutely see how they thought if they played the deadline day game, they thought the power was with them on deadline day, and it failed to acknowledge that, in fact, events can kick in, an injury, and suddenly they haven't got the player. And then my secondary point, that off-the-field events after the window closed, between September and January, in my opinion, changed Manchester City's willingness to do whatever it took to get Guéhi this week. And Liverpool could not compete with that.
Events, dear boy, events, as Harold Macmillan said about the Profumo affair. Take me into the Crystal Palace boardroom. They are dealing with events. They're dealing with a player not coming, who they thought might be the replacement for Marc Guéhi. They're dealing with a manager in Oliver Glasner, who is also running down his contract, and that's the way his career's gone, and he has every right to do that. And he was probably expecting, because he's brought 2 trophies in to Crystal Palace with the obviously the FA Cup, amazing day out at Wembley, and the Community Shield, amazing day out at Wembley. He is their most successful manager of all time. But there are increasing tensions between him and the board, partly because he's not going to sign a new contract, and partly because he is increasingly exasperated as what he said, feeling abandoned. And then after the Sunderland game, within 20 minutes of the Sunderland game, going on the BBC, going into the press conference and saying, I've had the heart. He said the heart, quite emotive language. Being absolutely abandoned is emotive enough, throwing the board on the bus, but then saying we've had the heart torn out of us, not once but twice, with Eze going before the start of the season to Arsenal, important player for them. And then with Marc Guéhi then going to Manchester City. And he effectively said that he was trying to pick his team and then got told Marc Guéhi couldn't play. Whereas,
do you think the timeline bears that out?
Just look at the back page headlines. I mean, they were basically saying that Guéhi was going to be leaving about
days
a week
before that
days before. So take me into the boardroom on that Saturday evening when you've got your manager throwing a meltdown. Look, as a journalist, I absolutely love a carnage press conference, and I'm sure you hated them when they happened with your managers. But look, it was great copy. The copy coming out of the Stadium of Delight, as we would call it as journalists, because it was just great copy. And he'd done a brilliant press conference. I mean, it's like London buses. Suddenly we got these two great press conferences.
Yeah.
But you are Steve Parrish, who is a fan and he's a chairman. He is wallet and he is head as well. He loves his football, knows his football, loves Palace, but also admires sustainability, which he has to in the age of PSR. I think people sort of understand that. What is your view when you've got, you've had overseas owners? How does that work on a Saturday night? Take me into the mindset in the boardroom.
Well, let me say before I say that so I really admire Oliver Glasner. Bit of a trade secret. I interviewed Oliver Glasner at the time when we hired Unai. He was on our shortlist. I interviewed him in his man flat in Frankfurt, which was literally a fridge, a bed, and a huge TV screen. His family weren't with him. He was all in on his job. I've never forgotten the meeting. I was with Johan, who was my sporting director. He had done huge profiling on the 4 or 5 managerial candidates and asked me to go with him to meet with Oliver. I liked him immensely. I was highly impressed.
Why?
Well, everything about him, his preparation for that meeting was superb.
Likeable guy?
Yeah, I really, extremely likeable. As I say, living in an extremely modest and extremely cold rental apartment in Frankfurt because he's all in on his job. He basically said he would get up very early in the morning, go to the training ground and come back to his flat, and it was basically a bed and a fridge. And I was really struck by that, none of the trappings of success. But yeah, I really liked him. And I was and obviously we didn't hire Oliver, but I was really pleased when not so long later he got himself a great job in the Premier League with Steve. And I'm not hugely surprised how well he's done for them.
Did Steve contact you, or did you have any?
Listen, we did speak. We did. Yeah, I gave Oliver reference actually to Steve when he asked, and I'm happy I did. And
sorry, he knew that you'd approached or been to talk to him?
Yeah,
or
I can't remember.
I mean, you get on with Steve. Did you just say, "I've heard you've been linked with this manager"?
We're
by
great
the
friends.
way,
I can't remember how the conversation
that's
happened.
good.
But we're great friends, and I.
We don't expect clubs to help each other, but that's good to know.
Yeah, maybe you're right. But I think I was probably out by then. I can't remember the timing, but right. I definitely really like Oliver Glasner, and I'm not hugely surprised how well he's done. By the way, I should say, because I'm sure you're thinking, I thought the comments were unnecessary and they didn't quite hold true because it was a bit emotive to, 2 times I've picked the team and then had a player plucked out. It's
the timeline doesn't reflect.
In both cases, that's an exaggeration. It's not the actual.
You would also be a bit annoyed if you are the 2 American co-owners and Steve Parrish, and 2 of them showed me round the academy across the road from the main training ground where they are developing these good kids, some of whom were on the bench. Within 12 miles of Selhurst Park, you would find the birthplaces of probably about 10 or 12 current England or recent England internationals. You think of the Loftus-Cheeks, Wilf Zaha as well. I mean, and
Ezri Konsa, my boy, came from Charlton.
Emil Smith-Rowe before he went across London. So, absolutely. So I would have been frustrated if I've invested all this money in this fantastic facility across the road and you've got all these kids coming through and their parents are listening in to Oliver Glasner saying basically he doesn't rate the kids. And it's partly his fault that he hasn't rotated the team.
By the way,
enough
before he
that
basically spat
exalted.
the dummy post-match, what did you make of no subs? I mean, that's your...
I mean, he was making a point.
Which was?
I've got a small squad and I'm good, but I keep on having players taken away from me, and it's ridiculous.
Well, okay.
I'm being abandoned.
You asked me about the phone call. Let's go to it. Okay, so that would have been right up there in the phone call. So in the connected world in which we live in, wherever David Blitzer and Josh Harris are in the world, if our listeners don't know. I think these 2 gentlemen, Josh Harris, David Blitzer, from my world, they're private equity people by background who having made billions in that world, have become huge investors in sport. I don't think anybody has more football investments in the world than David. and Josh owns the Washington Commanders. They together owned the Sixers. These are serious global sports investors, multi-billionaires who are the largest shareholders in Crystal Palace. But they've got a lot on their plate, and Steve, as their partner, is the guy in the trenches, running it for them, looking it after for them, and who would have been, on that phone call with, I suspect, two absolutely incandescent American owners. What the F is going on? Why is this guy slagging us off? He knew Marc would be leaving. We told him a week ago. And what the F is he doing? Not putting substitutes on. I'd love someone to do a check for me, but I cannot remember a Premier League match in memory where
I think
zeros.
it's the first time.
I can't remember a game where there was no substitution.
Yeah.
So this is not a bit of a gesture. It's a completely remarkable thing to do. Extraordinarily provocative.
2 fingers to the board?
Well, if I'm sitting in wherever I am in the world, David and Josh, and see that and hear it, yeah, I feel completely incandescent, because in the Premier League, every point counts. Every place is £3 million. It's their investment. So please have no illusions. They would have been as angry as Jim Ratcliffe would have been when Amorim chucked him and his team under the bus, or Desmond when Brendan Rodgers said, I asked for Ferrari and I got a Honda, or Todd Bowley and Badar Bali when recently Maresca did the same thing. So
a lot of people been going under the bus.
It's very interesting, isn't it? And we should talk more about that actually another day. But yes, if you are the guys writing the checks, you think you've got a professional working relationship with your manager, and he publicly does you over. They're human beings. They would be absolutely furious. But let's draw a contrast. Maresca Amorim did it. Within days, they're gone. The natural reaction, I can't have a guy working for me who doesn't respect the money, doesn't respect the owner.
Did you expect them to bomb Glasner out on that Saturday night?
Well, I know Steve really well,
right.
Okay? And Steve is thoughtful, and he's been around a long time, and he prides himself on being his own man and thinking independently. I really like that side of his character. And so I think, and I've been in that phone call, trust me, many, many times. Steve and I, in many respects, mirror each other. I'm the guy in the trenches doing the day-to-day with my owners who've got lots of business interests. Every 5 minutes after every match, having the debrief. I know what those calls are like. And in this case, it would have been high octane. But I think he will have said, look, I'm furious too, and I completely understand, and it's totally out of order, and, I wish I could make it not so. And I bet you they'd have said, this is gross misconduct. Go fire the guy. That would have been in a moment of emotion.
Compensation would have been modest, because he's only got a few months left on his contract. Would that have featured? Well, a couple of million, what would it have been?
Listen, if he's on $6 million a year and he's got 6 months to go, in principle, it may have been $3 million to get him out the building that day. But there definitely wouldn't have been a discussion about whether he's owed any money, because can we sue? Steve would have said, look,
on that, could they have looked at his contract and saying, once more to the breach, dear friends, and there is a breach of contract there?
Well, that's my point, that they would have...
So not to pay him, that's the point.
Yes, we call that termination for cause, is the American way of describing that. Cause meaning you have done something to breach your contract that breaches it, we owe you no payoff.
Right.
I'm sure that would have gone through their mind.
Yeah.
But Steve would have said, look, nobody wins in that situation. Yeah. So the guy's out the door. He sues us for wrongful dismissal. We're in court for a year. It's all through the papers. And in the end, we end up paying him anyway, because courts definitely favour employees in that situation. Right. We need to turn this around. We need to try and find a way to have alignment, not estrangement. I think the way his mind would have gone is, we've got a major trophy opportunity, which is the Conference League. I think they're probably bookies' favourites to win that. For a club that's only won one trophy in its history to win another, what a way for Glasner to go out. What a great outcome for Palace and their fans. And you mentioned Steve's a fan. Definitely better. Palace's prospects of winning that trophy are higher with a motivated and focused Glasner than with a caretaker or a new manager where they're not his players, where he's joining mid-season with no pre-season. So he'd have looked at that and said, I've got to keep him in the building. One, I'm not paying him off. If you want to go, Oliver, go. But that's you walking out the door and you're leaving us with no option and no money changes hands. And he'd have said to his American colleagues, if he wants to do that, we can't stop him, and he goes. But I'm going to be saying to him, look, we all know that, you want to get a big job in the summer. Your chances of getting that big job will be enhanced by going out on a high, winning 2 trophies at Crystal Palace when it's never won any in the preceding 100 years. And yes, I'm going to say it, people like David Blitzer and Josh Harris and Steve Parrish saying that we had our differences, but he's a great coach and behind the scenes we admired him, when those reference calls come in the summer from big clubs, as opposed to a guy who chucks his owners under the bus, gets a little bit over-emotional, lost 10 games in a row and then tried to blame everybody other than himself. That isn't a great look to end. So I think relying on Glasner's motivation and ambition to bring him back in the tent, swallowing your pride, because they would have been very hurt as owners, I think was really smart, and that's what I think Steve's done.
Parrish has done well there.
Now, we don't know whether it sticks, Henry. Oliver could escalate this week with another diatribe and leave them no option. But my feeling is cool heads have prevailed and a big tick for Steve on that.
Yeah, I bet Roy Hodgson is going into the attic and getting out his old Crystal Palace tracksuit. Look, let's hope he stays because he is a fantastic manager. So just to wrap this up, where are we with these 3 clubs? Who are the winners and losers? And if anyone can draw in a circumstance like that, from your take, from what you're saying, Manchester City are clear winners on and off the pitch because they got an outstanding player who they absolutely need. Financially, it makes sense for them, the APT element. But where does this leave Liverpool?
Well, look, again, with the benefit of hindsight, it would seem that they've had defensive issues this season. They've also had issues that, many, I remember Rafa telling me, he was like a guru. My first job, I'd never been in professional football, and I'd find myself, Liverpool chief exec working with a man of his experience, and he taught me so much. But one of his truisms, he always told me that it was very difficult to accommodate forwards who all thought they should be starting in the same 11. And it was very difficult to sign, 2, 3, 4 forwards, as Ferguson famously had 4, didn't he, when they won the treble. Rafa thought that was naturally a very difficult thing to do. And there are many people in football who would say that Liverpool were asking for trouble.
Particularly now, with most teams only playing 1 up.
Yeah, exactly. but to keep Mo, who has a huge stature in the club, and then go do Wirtz, who in most clubs would be the main man, Isak, who was the main man, and Ekitike, who I think has surprised to the upside so far. So, I think that, honestly, they will say they didn't really need or want Guéhi that much, but I don't think many Liverpool fans would agree with that. I definitely think they expected to get him later, having done all the work in the summer to get him close to Arne Slot, get him in the building. Probably didn't anticipate City going hard in the January. I think they thought they'd be in a fair fight next summer with no transfer fee.
Bit naive?
I think they were a bit too attracted and a bit too cute. No transfer fee, get him in the summer, he'll still come to us because he loves us. Bit naive. City came in, guns blazing, and blew them out the water this week with the transfer. So definitely City 1, Liverpool 0. The little angle on the APT case, I'm sure the clubs were asked by the Premier League, are we all cool with us settling this out of court?
You love your APT, don't you?
Look, I just think that was a brilliant result for City and a less good result for the league. I think it's real simple. The APT rules continue for another 9 years, That's how long.
I think I'm going to leave you in this pod with a camera pointing at you and a microphone. You can talk about APT for an hour while I go and put some more money in the meters.
You're right.
No, it's very important, and it's so important that you've actually brought your expertise and your knowledge and how APT would affect something as important for fans as buying the right players.
Yeah.
But the club that he has left behind, where does it leave?
That's the key
Crystal
question,
Palace?
isn't it? I would say off the field, Palace have got themselves a £20 million, windfall that probably there was a real chance that clubs would sit back and wait
Chelsea
the
get
summer.
a small slice of
Do
it
they?
because of their great academy
Yeah.
where Guéhi started.
They've got time to really think carefully about how they replace Glasner, and time is a big advantage. I certainly wouldn't want to be leaving that late in the summer. So I suspect that
They'll
Steve...
know, don't they? Don't they?
I don't know if they'll know yet,
But
but
surely everyone has a succession plan, particularly for a manager running out of
they'll
contract.
have been monitoring managers, and there's been a lot going on off the field at Palace as well. Dougie Friedman left, Steve and he were very close. Dougie would probably have been in charge of keeping a watching brief on long-term replacements for Glasner. But things change. You have to have a lot of irons in the fire, because this summer is going to be the most significant managerial merry-go-round I think we've ever seen. I can't wait to talk to you about it. But just think, with Tuchel, Ancelotti and Pochettino coming out of World Cup deals, Glasner free, Iraola probably free, and then on the other side of the managerial equation, is Thomas going to see it through at Spurs? Thomas Frank, I mean. It's right on the cusp, isn't it? Is Arnie going to come good in the second half of the season? It's so much room. I'm hearing so much
We must do
speculation.
another pod
We should.
on managers.
We should.
Definitely. But thank you for deciphering the code of
Yeah.
Guéhi's move and throwing some letters in there. APT.
Well, thank you very much. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.